I'm Jane Hansen. Welcome, everybody. In the arena, each year, beginning on Ash Wednesday, Catholics and Christians around the world observe a season of 40 days called Lent, which has been described as both a time of soul-searching and repentance. It's a season for reflection, taking stock of your life. So in that same spirit, we're going to reflect on some important issues that are happening right now. Joining us, Monsignor Kieran Harrington, the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, and our regular contributors, Elizabeth Scalia, Managing Editor of the Catholic Portal at pathos.com, and Grant Gallicho, the Associate Editor of Commonweal magazine. Welcome to all of you. So, Monsignor, let's start with you as the priest of the group. What is Lent and why do we observe it?
40 days that lead up to our celebration of the Paschal Mystery, of the Lord's Passion, His death, and His resurrection. So it's a real beautiful time for us to kind of take stock and get our lives in order in preparation for that celebration.
You know, a lot of people sometimes don't even realize that Lent has started. And I get this question, when's Ash Wednesday? When does Lent start? What does that all mean? Don't you guys find that?
I work in a building that is full of Christians, so it's, you know, when it's Ash Wednesday. But I find it interesting how it seems to me every year there are I see more people on the street, on the train with ashes.
Really?
Yeah, and it seems like it started to sort of emanate out from the Catholic Church. Some Protestants are starting to do it more and more.
There are a lot of Protestant churches that are embracing ashes now, and even embracing the whole idea of a penitential 40 days. I know Baptists not too far from where I live who are doing ashes and who are starting to look at re-embracing some Lenten traditions that have fallen by the wayside.
That's a problem, I think, on one level, though, because many Catholics who have left the Catholic Church have gone to these other faiths, and as a result, they're bringing Catholic practices to Protestantism.
Well, so what's wrong if at least they're taking some time during these 40 days to reflect and
but
think
it's not
about
always people with the Catholic background. I happen to work with the evangelical guy at Pathos, Tim Dalrymple, who is evangelical, born in that way, born into that faith, and he wrote me last week and said, I really am wondering if we shouldn't be embracing confession on some level. I think they're starting to take a look at the fact that there are no rituals, there's no liturgy, and that they're missing something, that the word is fine, but it's not enough. There has to be something more.
I think that's the thing about Ash Wednesday, which is so compelling. It is, as a Catholic, the ritual of going to get ashes on one's forehead is something which everybody can do, no matter what your situation in life is, as if you're married and divorced and remarried, or whatever it is that people...
I mean, if you can't take communion, but you can get ashes.
Yeah, and I think that brings a lot of people out there. For some reason, it's the one day where somebody can feel like they're marked.
Well, I think it's a really tribal thing, and that's exactly right. It says, I am claimed for Christ. It's very in-your-face, countercultural. Yeah. I've been smudged. I know who I am.
But there's a strange paradox there with the readings for the Ash Wednesday Mass, because there's, don't show off your faith, and then everybody goes up the line.
And shows it off.
They get it, yep.
What really are the rules now? Because there used to be much stricter about what you could eat and what you couldn't eat, and it's a little bit
really
friendly.
The number of fast days has been reduced dramatically, right? So it's Ash Wednesday and Good Friday are days of total fast and abstinence, which means that you are entitled to two small meals and one principal meal throughout the day, and no meat throughout the Fridays of Lent and on the fast days. So it really is, the nature of this is to be penitential, right? So one shouldn't give up meat on Fridays of Lent and have big lobster dinners. That kind of goes against the whole spirit of it. The nature of this is, So Jane, no lobster this Friday. But basically, the challenge for us is to how do we live a life which is reflective of the fact that the Lord has suffered and died for us. How do I live a penitential life in keeping with the penance that He has performed on our behalf?
Okay, so I've heard a lot of people that are trying to decide what kinds of sacrifices they're going to make during Lent, and somebody told me that they were giving up Facebook and technology, which I thought was a really kind of interesting, because in today's world, that's really a sacrifice.
It's actually saying I'm going to disconnect in a very literal way. We always say, well, we're going to disconnect and pull back a little bit. But this is, I think a lot of people are going to say they want to do it, but they're going to have difficulty with it. Yeah. Because they don't realize how dependent they've become.
And I think it's important, when I was growing up, it changed a lot. When people said, don't give up something, do something for Lent. And I think that there's value to that. But it is important to strip away a little bit of the things that have kind of started to clutter up our life. And Facebook, I think, is a great example of that, right? I mean, people check their Facebook status and change, updating,
Well, they're in
checking
the
in.
office, and they should
all
be
the
doing
way.
something
Well,
else.
it's sort of 40 days in the desert, isn't it?
Giving up technology or fasting from technology is something which people should think about.
I am going to try it.
I think Jesus had it harder in the desert. I just want to put that out there. I mean, Facebook is great. I love to know what my friends are having for lunch, but let's not overdo it.
Okay, so what are you giving, or what are you going to do for Lent that's different than the rest of the year?
I'm going to give up meat.
For the entire 40 days?
I am, yeah. I mean, my wife doesn't eat meat, so it's not
That big of a
it's
sacrifice.
not, but it is when I do eat meat at lunch at the office. So that's what I'm going to try and do. Yeah, at the pub. Some years I've given up caffeine, but I realize that that's actually harder on other people than it is for me.
Right, to your point earlier about it's what you're going to do
Yep.
and not what you say.
And that's what I'm doing. I'm giving up meat as well. And it's really in keeping with the Eastern Church. That's what the Eastern Church does during the season of Lent. They give up meat. And in fact, the Western Church had done that as well during the season of Lent. And it's going to be very, very difficult because that's all I eat.
One of the things that's happening right now in conjunction with the beginning of Lent is the Pope has a new book out about Jesus of Nazareth Holy Week. And in there's some very specific talk about Jews not being responsible for the death of Christ. Now, I know this has theologically been out there for a long time, but what is the point in this book specifically?
I think the point was to have a pope who knows how to use all media and who understands that everything that he says that's remotely controversial will be widely disseminated, to finally put a very troubling and erroneous narrative to rest. And I think that was basically what he was saying in that portion of the book. This is done. We don't want to even discuss this anymore. Don't say it anymore. We don't think it. It's not real. Put it away.
But what will it do about anti-Semitism? Will it help?
Well, I think it's interesting. To me, what's interesting about it is it's a German Pope who lived during the Second World War, who was drafted into the Hitler Youth. This is a guy who is intimately familiar with the evil of anti-Semitism. And I think for him saying it, there's a certain power. And because, of course, this goes to the reference in Scriptures, which we read during Good Friday and on Palm Sunday, which speaks about let his blood be upon us and on our children, right? And so historically, that has been the reference which has been cause for pogroms. And I mean, obviously, that wasn't the cause of the pogroms, but people exploited that for pogroms. So his repudiation is important.
It's actually one of the points he makes in the book, is that crowd shouting those words wasn't necessarily a crowd of Jews.
Yeah.
Or a crowd of religious Jews.
Well, he makes the reference that it's also the blood of Christ which washes everyone clean. So let his blood be upon us and upon our children. The reference is really
that's
that
there's
wash
a duality there.
So, Grant, weigh in on this.
I think my hope is that during Holy Week, people file into church and they hear their priests preach on this topic. I mean, when you listen to the Gospel of John, you hear a lot about the Jews. I mean, and that's been really, turned to hate. And I don't know how many Catholics really fully grasp that history. And so I think the Pope has given the Church a very important opportunity to correct that.
Isn't one of the things that he says in the book that everybody was a Jew back when Jesus was killed?
Yeah, he does make that point.
So there you are. We've got a lot more to talk about some of the events that have happened recently, which will give us even more pause for thought during the season of Lent. We're going to take a break for just a moment, but we want to invite you to weigh in our discussion anytime by going to our website at netny.net and click on Enter the Arena. We welcome your questions and your comments. We're going to take up a couple of other seasonable topics, including unemployment, creating jobs, what can we do to help, and we're going to talk about the latest in the sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. We've been talking about the season of Lent, which is, of course, a time for a lot of reflection. It seems very ironic that there have been some big news in the Catholic Church during the past week, particularly having to do with sex abuse in the Philadelphia diocese. 21 priests have been put on leave. I found there to be startling information from all of this after a time when we thought that this had been dealt with.
Yeah, I think that that's the reaction of most people is really trying to understand what actually happened there. This is all related to a Philadelphia grand jury which has indicted the priest personnel director, the former priest personnel director of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, and it's very troubling that that priest would be put on administrative leave this late, 9 years after the Dallas Charter was implemented.
Well, what I find, and I'm sure a lot of Philly Catholics find shocking, is that when this grand jury piece came out, they said that there were 37 priests in active ministry who had some kind of evidence of abuse in their past. And the Archbishop came out and said, well, there are no priests who have admitted or verified accusations, I think is the term that he used, who are in ministry. 6 days later, the Archdiocese put 4 guys on leave. And then another couple of weeks later, maybe 4 weeks later, they announced that 21 of the 37 had been placed on leave. And these are people who were in ministry well after the Bishops' Conference approved their first policy in 1992, which was not binding, but it was a policy that very much looks like the current policy, which is now canon law for the states.
So the troubling part for Catholics in Philadelphia and everywhere is saying, look, I thought we put things into place that would name these people and make sure that they're out of a place where they can have dealings with young people. And secondly, does that mean that these policies are not working? Does it mean somebody's not paying attention? What does it mean? And I think that's the real concern.
Yeah, I think that we're going to know in a couple of weeks. The John Jay report is going to come out, which will be causes and context of the abuse scandal, and it's going to address this question. I mean, from my perspective, I guess I don't understand all the details, don't know all the facts. I'm assuming that there have been audit reviews, and I don't understand how, if there were audit reviews, how this was not discovered by the auditors.
One of the things that the victims groups are asking is what's wrong with the audit process? I mean, the way it works now is every diocese essentially conducts its own, and it sends its report to.
But that's not accurate. I mean, I had been involved with the audit process here, and
right,
there's a group that actually comes on site and reviews your records. And
right, but they don't have carte blanche. I mean, they are given records that each diocese decides it wants to release.
They go to parishes. They go on site. There is an on-site visitation. So to me, it is troubling.
Yeah, well, it should be. I mean, people. There are bishops now who argue that the zero tolerance policy should be softened, so that and I don't mean if you're a parent, why would you trust that bishops would be able to correctly use their discretion if the zero tolerance policy is softened? That's the problem with this
coming at this late date. That's the problem.
No, I mean, listen, things happen that are very that are really unfortunate and are aberrational. I think this is just aberrational. I mean, that's not minimizing what has happened here. This, to me, it's difficult. It's hard to comprehend. However, I can say that there is no outside of these aberrational situations. Is we are working as a church very vigorously to ensure that children who are in our care are safe, and that is not happening in other sectors of our society. I'm not trying to deflect here, and I know that that's how people would see this, is that you're speaking, but the Catholic Church takes the safety and well-being of children very, very seriously, much more safety than the public institutions in which we live.
Yes, but this needs to be a wake-up call.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about guys who were just taken out of ministry, who this year who had allegations dating back to the early 90s.
Yep. So, I mean, this is one of those discussions that's going to go on, and the fallout isn't complete on this, and we will have this new report that's coming out, I think, in the spring, and we'll certainly discuss that when we get to it. This week, the bishops here in the state of New York met with Governor Cuomo this past week. So, what was that encouraging? Because there's been some real interplay between the governor and the bishops.
Well, I think it was I think it was a very positive meeting. I think the bishops were clear in their articulation of what it is that we believe on all matters, from defending human life to the sanctity of marriage, to Catholic education, to the work that we're involved in health and human services. So the bishops, I think, were clear, and I think the governor certainly understood the perspective. I think appreciated the perspective of the bishops. There was a frank discussion in terms of about faith and the importance of faith in one's life. It was an extraordinarily cordial meeting. I think the governor was very, very gracious, and the bishops were very gracious. So
they were glad. So they were glad they got a chance to talk to Governor Cuomo. Bottom line.
Bottom line, I think that they were glad, and I think the governor was glad.
Had this meeting been scheduled for quite some time, or was it recently scheduled?
Well, that was the story in the Daily News, right? So that the meeting had not been had been scheduled or had not been scheduled. I think that the reason for that is you have a new governor, you have a new administration. Sometimes things fall through the cracks.
Yeah. Well, maybe he finally decided it was time. At any rate, we said we were going to talk about unemployment and again, getting back to this season of Lent as Christians and reflecting on what we can and cannot do to help people who may not have jobs or people that we see suffering. I'm just curious about you guys. We're watching what's playing out in Wisconsin. We're watching what's playing out elsewhere with unions and employment and et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts about relating it to this time of year?
I think we're in a point where people are tightening their belts and struggling all over the country, and it's almost like there's a pack mentality, and we've descended into a pack mentality. Everybody is grabbing at everybody else and saying, well, he's got more, he doesn't have enough, I don't have enough, that person shouldn't have what I can't get. And I think that Lent should be able to help us settle down and focus a little bit on what's really important beyond, the haves and the materialism, and I'm hoping that it will have an effect.
This is something that you've been watching very closely, Grant.
Yes, I mean, the most recent numbers look pretty good. I think we may be seeing a kind of upswing now. As regards the situation in Wisconsin, I've been riveted by it. I think it's a fascinating conflict. It really sets the parties apart. It's a good Catholic issue. The church in the States has a very long history of supporting labor rights. And I'm amazed that it's gone on for as long as it has.
I think it's becoming theater now. I think it's a little less genuine than it was when it started.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think the governor is quite serious.
Yes, and I think this began as a genuine grassroots response to the governor.
Yeah.
I think what's happened, though, now is that both corners have their interested parties throwing money and organizational skills at it.
True.
And it's not quite the organic movement that it started out as.
The laborers who are rallying, they do that out of a genuine feeling that they want to hang on to their right to collective bargaining.
No, I understand that, but also, let's face it, a lot of the rhetoric has turned into theater, and it's descending into theater.
If you take a look at what is happening, see, I would take a little bit of a different tack than Grant on the unemployment numbers. I mean, even the New York Times editorial kind of looked at the unemployment numbers and said, yeah, we're glad that it's below 9%, but let's face facts. Basically, this is because a lot of people who were on unemployment are now off the rolls of unemployment.
Right, you're talking about a smaller pool.
You're talking about a smaller pool to begin with, and you have a lot of people who are underemployed. And so when you consider employment questions, that people are not working, in fact, they've been unemployed for so long that they can no longer collect the benefit, then you have people who are underemployed. It certainly does put pressure on on unions.
Yeah.
But it also does put the pressure on the governors, too, to be fair. I mean, let's face it, our unemployment is at a point now where our tax revenues, which were at record highs in 2006,
Sure, of course, they're
are
going
now
down.
going down into levels that are approaching 1950s levels. And we cannot sustain 2011 spending on 1950 tax revenues.
So that's true, and of course the other great concern I have is my daughter's a junior in college. She will be graduating next year, and I have no idea where she's going to find employment.
Well, my son had to look far and wide and end up leaving the state for a very low-paying job, and he's still hoping that he'll be able to become employed, because the longer you remain unemployed, statistics are showing, the less chance you have of ever becoming employed again. Employers are out there at monster.com saying unemployed people don't even bother responding to this job request unless you're already employed.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we want them to have hope and optimism and think about the opportunities, and it becomes kind of hard to keep them.
It's going to be a very busy Lent.
Yes, it is. All right, we're going to take a break. Speaking of which, we'll have some final thoughts. We will be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Continuing our conversation, we are joined once again by Monsignor Kieran Harrington, the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, and our regular contributors, Elizabeth Scalia, Managing Editor of the Catholic Portal at pathos.com, and Grant Gallicho, Associate Editor of Commonweal magazine. All right, everybody, we obviously have focused on a bunch of different subjects during Lent, and I think you wanted to be able to say something about the whole sex abuse scandal coming out of Philadelphia.
Yeah, and I don't want it to be misconstrued as me minimizing anything at all, but I think that we have to keep in mind that we've begun a process, and we began the process in 2002. And it's like house cleaning. It's like house cleaning is a process, and you think you've got your cleansers and you've got your cleaning plan, and then you find that either something didn't work right, or you just didn't do a good job, or you move a piece of furniture and say, look what we missed. As a process, it's going to take some time to get it all right. And this is an incredibly distressing story. I don't want to minimize it at all, but I'm hopeful that it's just sort of a corner that got missed as opposed to a systemic problem.
It is a setback, though, nevertheless.
No,
Absolutely.
I mean, we all have that hope. We don't want the church to fail. But you can understand why parents, look at the history of the abuse crisis, which really began in 1984 in the States, and they wonder, how is it that in 2011 we still have a major diocese where so many priests could be in ministry who shouldn't be?
And it's especially troubling because we have really come to think of the sexual abuse situations of having had occurred in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. This is much more recent, and it's really very distressing. There's no arguing
You have
that.
to wonder. I mean, now that there is this particular canon law for the states, will there be canonical trials brought against officials in Philly?
And will we ever get to the point where we can get back to the church as the church and all of that, and not have this hanging over our heads?
Our penitential season is going to last for decades and decades.
It is indeed. So you've been quiet as we were just discussing this last couple of minutes, because I know it's all equally as troubling to you. But I guess maybe, from a ministerial standpoint, if you could just kind of wrap that up for us.
I think the issue is that the people that I know and that we work with are working really hard every day to make sure that the children in our care are safe, that the people who've been hurt by priests are taken care of. I mean, you try every day to kind of to do this, and there's no doubt that the proclamation of the gospel is really impacted by this. So it's just it's just hard to kind of
hard to digest.
Sometimes. Yeah,
it is.
So
but you have to keep going at what you're doing.
And I think that in Philadelphia, it is my understanding that the archdiocese was the most restrictive in terms of priests who were priests who were on administrative leave, and so that's why it is just troubling. I'm hoping that there is an explanation. And I'm hoping that there is an explanation. I think that there will be an explanation, but right now we've been hard to see it.
All right, so let's have our final thoughts on Lent. Almsgiving, et cetera, et cetera. Final because
prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. And I think that the whole thing is taking away those things in our life which are distracting us from our relationship with God. And so there are a lot of things that we find in our life. Our consumption of wealth, our consumption of food and alcohol, and hopefully to make more room for God, and that making more room is the prayer that we engage in.
Grant?
This is the most powerful season. I mean, this is when God emptied himself. And so I find it extremely nourishing to do that for myself. And, given the items in the news, not just the abuse scandal, but the problems that we face today, I think it's a good time for us to empty ourselves and focus on Christ.
Elizabeth?
This is a spring cleaning for me, and if we're seeing that the church's cleaning process has not been as thorough as we would like, that makes me particularly mindful that my own cleansing process had better be very open to the Holy Spirit and very thorough this year.
And mine is going to be about forgiveness. That's my intent. So there.
It's a gift you're going to give yourself.
It is a gift I'm going to give myself. So thank you all, as usual, for being here, and thank you for joining us. Remember that you do not need a TV to watch the net. We are always online at netny.net. And for all of us here, I'm Jane Hansen. We'll see you next time in the arena.